The Zarkon Alliance spanned 3 spiral arms of the Milky Way, encompassing over 4,000 inhabited worlds and twice as many space stations. Throughout this vast expanse of interstellar civilization, one species stood unchallenged at the apex of the socio-biological hierarchy, the Grothar. They called themselves the galaxy's strongest species, and few contested this claim. Standing at an average height of 7 feet, with dense musculature supporting frames, evolved in a high-gravity environment. The average Grothar could lift 3 times their body weight without strain. Their thick, gray-blue skin could withstand radiation levels fatal to most other sentient species, and their redundant cardiovascular system made them nearly impossible to kill with a single blow. The Zenith's Pride, the most luxurious commercial liner in the Alliance, reflected this hierarchy in its very design. The forward cabins, closest to the bridge and command centers, were reserved exclusively for Grothar passengers and their honored guests. The midship areas hosted the various allied species deemed worthy by their physical capabilities, and the aft cabins, the back of the ship, farthest from the vital systems and primary escape pods, these were where humans sat. Commander Vrax Grokar adjusted the ceremonial sash across his broad chest as he led his delegation toward the Zenith's Pride's forward boarding ramp. His hulking frame cast a long shadow in the spaceport's artificial lighting, and the throng of lesser beings parted before him, like water breaking against stone. As the military attaché to the Grothar High Council, he was accustomed to such deference. "Commander," Lieutenant Saul Wren said from behind him, his gravelly voice barely audible over the bustling sounds of the spaceport. "Are you certain we shouldn't have arranged for private transport? This commercial vessel seems beneath your station." Vrax grunted dismissively. "The High Council believes we should occasionally mingle with the allied species. It promotes unity, or so the diplomats claim." He didn't bother masking the disdain in his voice. "Besides, the Zenith's Pride is the finest ship in the commercial fleet. Even its forward cabins are suitable for warriors of our caliber." The boarding officer, a fellow Grothar, saluted as they approached. "Commander Grokar, it is an honor to welcome you aboard. Your delegation has been assigned our finest suite in the forward section. The captain requests the pleasure of your company for dinner once we're underway." Vrax nodded curtly as his 6-member delegation filed past him onto the boarding ramp. "We accept. Ensure that no lesser species are seated at our table." The officer acknowledged the command with another salute. As Vrax moved to follow his team, his attention was momentarily caught by a commotion at the distant aft boarding ramp. A small group of humans were being subjected to additional security screening. Their luggage opened, and contents examined by bored-looking security personnel. Vrax's lip curled in contempt. Humans, so fragile, so temperamental, and yet somehow they had managed to secure membership in the Alliance despite their obvious biological inferiority. Among the humans stood a woman, her posture straight, despite the indignity of the search. Something about her composure struck Vrax as unusual, but he dismissed the thought. Humans were hardly worth his consideration. With a final glance of disdain, he boarded the Zenith's Pride, already anticipating the luxuries that awaited him in the forward cabin section. Ellen Mora had endured many humiliations in her career as a human engineer within the Zarkon Alliance. But the security screenings before boarding any interstellar vessel always ranked among the most grating. She stood patiently as a bored Vexaloran security officer, with 4 arms methodically picked through her tools and personal effects. "Purpose of travel?" the officer droned, not bothering to look up from her bag. "Professional. I'm being transferred to the Altair Engineering Station." Ellen kept her voice neutral, having learned long ago that showing frustration only prolonged these interactions. "Engineering credentials." Ellen handed over her Alliance certification chip. The officer scanned it with a cursory gesture, then raised his compound eyes in mild surprise. "Level 7 certification? That's unusual for a human." Ellen bit back the retort that sprang to mind. I specialized in propulsion systems. May I board now? The departure is scheduled in 20 minutes. The officer handed back her certification and waved her through. Aft cabins, Section E. You know the way. I always do, Ellen muttered under her breath. As she made her way to the designated boarding ramp, the smallest and least maintained of the ship's 3 entrances, Ellen caught sight of a Grothar delegation boarding at the forward ramp. Their leader, adorned in military regalia, stood a head taller than his companions, his bearing imperious, even at a distance. She recognized the insignia of a high-ranking commander, another Grothar, who probably believed the galaxy revolved around his species. Ellen adjusted her pack and boarded through the aft entrance, where she was greeted by a human steward who seemed genuinely pleased to see one of his own kind. Welcome aboard the Zenith's Pride, Ms. Mora. Your cabin is E42, just down this corridor. The aft lounge will be serving refreshments once we're underway, and dinner will be at Standard Alliance time. Ellen smiled, appreciating the small kindness. Thanks. Any other engineers in this section? The steward shook his head. Not that I'm aware of. Mostly merchants, a few academics, and some tourists. Though we do have a human security specialist in E38, Mirital. Perhaps you know each other. The Alliance is big, but humans are few. I'll introduce myself once I'm settled. Her cabin was exactly what she expected. Functional, but cramped. With a narrow bed, a desk that folded into the wall, and a bathroom unit barely large enough to turn around in. The view screen showed not the spectacular vista of the spaceport, but rather the dull metal of a maintenance access tunnel. Typical. Ellen stowed her belongings and sat on the edge of the bed, feeling the familiar vibration of the ship's massive engines through the deck plates. Despite everything, a small thrill ran through her. No matter how many times she traveled between the stars, the wonder of it never quite faded. A soft chime from the cabin's communication system announced the imminent departure. Ellen lay back on the bed, closed her eyes, and prepared for the gentle lurch of the inertial dampeners as the Zenith's Pride broke free from the spaceport's gravitational tethers. Instead, she heard a sound that made her blood run cold, the high-pitched whine of stabilizers struggling against unexpected resistance. Something was wrong. Vrax Grothar reclined in his private suite's lounge chair, a glass of fermented Grothar nectar in his hand, as he watched the spaceport recede through the panoramic viewport. Lieutenant Saul Wren stood nearby, reviewing the delegation's itinerary on a datapad. The transit to Altair should take approximately 73 hours. Commander, Sol reported, we'll be passing through the Castor Nebula, which the captain assures me provides quite the spectacle from the forward observation deck. Vrax made a non-committal sound. I've seen nebulae before. Lieutenant, focus on ensuring our delegation's security during the diplomatic meetings, once we arrive. The mining guilds on Altair have been restless, and I won't have our mission compromised by local dissent. Of course, Commander, I've already... Sol's words were cut short as the ship lurched violently, sending Vrax's drink flying from his hand to splatter against the pristine bulkhead. The artificial gravity fluctuated momentarily, causing both Grothar to momentarily rise from their positions before being slammed back down. Vrax rose to his feet, instinctively bracing himself against the wall as the ship shuddered again. What is the meaning of this? He growled, reaching for the communication panel. Before he could activate it, the ship's alert system blared to life, bathing the luxurious cabin in pulsating red light. Attention all passengers. The captain's voice echoed through the cabin, the usual confidence replaced by tightly controlled tension. We have encountered an unexpected plasma storm. Please remain in your cabins while we navigate through this disturbance. There is no immediate danger, but as a precaution, all passengers should be prepared for emergency protocols. Vrax exchanged a glance with Sol, both recognizing the carefully constructed lie in the captain's announcement. If there was no immediate danger, there would be no need for emergency protocols. "Get the rest of the delegation assembled in the corridor," Vrax ordered. "I'm going to the bridge to assess the situation myself." Saul saluted and moved to comply, while Vrax strode purposefully toward his cabin door. It slid open to reveal a corridor already filling with concerned Grothar passengers, many of whom recognized him and immediately bombarded him with questions. Ignoring them, Vrax pushed through the crowd toward the bridge access corridor. As he approached the security door that separated the passenger areas from the ship's command sections, he found it sealed, a red security light pulsing above the access panel. A ship's officer, a young Grothar with worry evident in his rigid posture, stood before the door, facing the increasingly agitated passengers. "What is the meaning of this?" Vrax demanded, using his commanding height to tower over the officer. "I am Commander Vrax Grokar of the High Council Military Attaché. I demand access to the bridge." The officer swallowed visibly. "I apologize, Commander, but the bridge has been sealed off. The plasma storm has created an unexpected radiation surge. The bridge section's radiation shielding has been compromised, and the captain has ordered a complete isolation of that section to prevent exposure to the rest of the ship." Vrax narrowed his eyes, processing this information. Even Grothar resilience had its limits when it came to certain types of radiation. "What is the status of the navigation systems? Are we still on course?" The officer hesitated before responding, which told Vrax everything he needed to know. "The primary navigation systems are compromised, Commander. The bridge crew is attempting to establish remote access to the secondary systems, but the radiation is interfering with internal communications." Before Vrax could respond, the ship lurched again, more violently this time. The lights flickered, and for a moment, the artificial gravity wavered, causing several passengers to stumble. "All passengers, please proceed immediately to emergency gathering points." The captain's voice came again, this time with undisguised urgency. "Forward section passengers are to proceed to the central hub. I repeat, all forward section passengers must evacuate to the central hub immediately." Murmurs of alarm spread through the gathered Grothar. Evacuation from the forward section, the safest, most secure part of the ship, was unprecedented. Whatever was happening, the situation was far more serious than a simple navigation issue. Vrax turned to the officer, his voice dropping to a dangerous growl. "Tell me the truth, now! What are we facing?" The young officer's composure cracked under Vrax's intense gaze. "The plasma storm is unlike anything in our records, Commander. It's not just radiation. The electromagnetic interference has disabled our primary propulsion systems and navigation. The forward section is directly in the path of the most intense radiation waves. The captain believes our best chance is to move all passengers to the central and aft sections, while the engineering team attempts to restore propulsion." Vrax processed this information with the cold calculation of a military strategist. "So, we're dead in space, drifting into a plasma storm, with no navigation and no propulsion. Is that an accurate assessment, officer?" The officer could only nod. Vrax turned to Saul, who had rejoined him after gathering their delegation. "Get our people to the central hub. I want a direct line to engineering. If the bridge is inaccessible, then the engine room becomes our command center." As the group of Grothar began moving toward the central sections of the ship, Vrax couldn't help but note the irony of their situation. The mighty Grothar, the galaxy's strongest species, were being forced to retreat from the forward cabins, their rightful place, to seek safety in the parts of the ship typically reserved for lesser beings. The thought filled him with indignation, but also with grim determination. This was a temporary setback, nothing more. He would ensure that the Grothar maintained control of the situation, regardless of where on the ship they were forced to congregate. Ellen was halfway to the aft lounge when the emergency announcement came through, ordering all passengers to their designated emergency gathering points. unlike the passengers from the forward sections, who were being directed to the central hub. Aft passengers were instructed to remain in the aft lounge. The lounge was already filling with anxious humans, and a few members of other species as Ellen arrived. Most were clustered around the room's single-view screen, which showed a swirling mass of blue-violet energy enveloping the forward section of the ship. "That's no ordinary plasma storm," Ellen murmured, her engineer's mind already analyzing what she was seeing. The energy patterns were too concentrated, the electromagnetic signatures too intense for a natural phenomenon. "You've got that right," came a voice beside her. Ellen turned to find a tall woman with dark skin and close-cropped hair, watching the screen with a professional detachment that marked her as someone familiar with crisis situations. "I'm Mira Tal, ship's security specialist." "Ellen Mora, propulsion engineer. Any word from the bridge about what we're dealing with?" Mira shook her head. "Communications are spotty at best. What I've gathered is that the bridge has been cut off due to radiation, and we've lost primary propulsion. The good news is that life support is still functioning on auxiliary power. And the bad news? We're drifting deeper into whatever that is." Mira gestured to the view screen. With no way to steer and limited power for shields, Ellen studied the energy patterns on the screen more carefully. "That looks like a cascade effect in the plasma. If the initial wave hit our primary electromagnetic shielding, it could have created a resonance feedback loop in our propulsion matrix." Mira raised an eyebrow. "You get all that from looking at some pretty colors on a screen?" Ellen smiled thinly. "Level 7 propulsion certification. I specialized in electromagnetic propulsion systems." "Well, then," Mira said, lowering her voice. "You might be interested to know that I overheard the aft section's ranking officer say they can't reach engineering. Apparently, there's some kind of internal communication failure between sections." Ellen frowned. "That doesn't make sense. The internal comm systems have triple redundancies specifically to prevent total failure during emergencies." Before she could speculate further, the lounge doors slid open to admit a group of Grothar, an unusual sight in the aft section. Leading them was the imposing commander Ellen had seen at the boarding ramp, his military bearing unmistakable, even as he surveyed the predominantly human gathering with poorly concealed disdain. The humans in the lounge fell silent, many shrinking back instinctively at the presence of so many Grothar in their space. Ellen, however, remained where she was, watching with interest as the commander approached the aft section's officer, a nervous-looking Vexilloran who seemed overwhelmed by the situation. "I am Commander Vrax Grokar," the Grothar announced, his deep voice carrying easily through the hushed lounge. "By order of the captain, all forward section passengers have been relocated to safer areas of the ship. I am assuming command of emergency operations in this section." The Vexilloran officer seemed relieved to relinquish responsibility. "Yes, Commander. We have approximately 123 passengers in the aft section, primarily humans with a few Trilaxians and Vexillorans. Life support is stable, but we've lost direct communication with engineering and the bridge." Vrax nodded curtly. "What is the status of the auxiliary navigation systems in this section?" "The aft section has a backup navigation terminal, but it's not responding. We believe the plasma interference has affected the ship-wide navigation network." Ellen found herself stepping forward before she could think better of it. "The problem isn't the terminal. It's the network architecture. If the primary navigation hub in the bridge section has been compromised, the auxiliary systems would automatically lock down to prevent cascading failures." All eyes turned to her, including the commander's piercing gaze. Ellen felt a momentary flutter of uncertainty, but pushed it aside. This was her area of expertise, and right now, expertise mattered more than species hierarchy. "And you are?" Vrax demanded, looking down at her from his imposing height. "Ellen Mora, Level 7 propulsion engineer, specializing in electromagnetic drive systems. I was being transferred to Altair Engineering Station." A flicker of surprise crossed the commander's face, before he masked it with a return to his imperious demeanor. "And you believe you can restore the navigation systems?" "Not from here," Ellen replied honestly. "The aft navigation terminal is too limited. But if we can establish direct communication with engineering, I might be able to help them bypass the lockdown and restore at least basic propulsion control." Vrax studied her for a long moment, and Ellen could almost see the internal conflict playing out behind his eyes. The instinctive dismissal of a human's capabilities, warring with the pragmatic need for anyone with relevant skills in their current crisis. Finally, he turned to the Vexilloran officer. "Is there a direct access route to engineering from this section?" "Yes, Commander. There's a maintenance corridor that runs the length of the ship, but it's not designed for passenger use. And with the ship's current instability—" "Show me," Vrax interrupted. The officer led Vrax to a control panel on the wall and brought up a schematic of the ship. Ellen followed, along with Mira and Lieutenant Saul Wren, who hadn't left the commander's side since they entered. "This maintenance corridor connects all three major sections," the officer explained, tracing a thin line that ran along the ventral spine of the ship. "But sections of it pass through areas with minimal shielding. If the radiation levels continue to increase—" "It's our only option," Vrax declared. He turned to Saul. "Assemble a team. We need to reach engineering and assess the situation firsthand." "I should go," Ellen interjected. "I can recognize propulsion system issues that others might miss." Vrax looked down at her with thinly veiled contempt. "This will be dangerous. Human. The corridor may be exposed to radiation levels that your fragile physiology cannot withstand." Ellen met his gaze steadily. "With all due respect, Commander, I'm not volunteering out of bravado. I'm volunteering because I'm the most qualified person in this section to help restore propulsion. Without engines, we're all dead, regardless of our species' radiation tolerance." A tense silence followed her declaration. Around them, the other passengers watched the exchange with a mixture of apprehension and hope. Finally, Lieutenant Saul broke the silence. "Commander, the humans' expertise could be valuable. Our delegation includes warriors and strategists, but no engineers with propulsion specialization." Vrax's expression darkened momentarily at being contradicted, but he gave a curt nod. "Very well. The human engineer will accompany the team." He fixed Ellen with a stern look. "But understand this. I command this mission. You will follow orders without question, or you will remain here. Is that clear?" "Crystal," Ellen replied, refusing to be intimidated. "When do we leave?" "Immediately. The longer we drift, the deeper we'll be pulled into the plasma storm." Vrax turned to address the gathered passengers. "The rest of you will remain here under Lieutenant Saul's authority. Conserve resources and prepare for possible emergency protocols." As the commander began assembling his team, Ellen caught Mira's eye. "Watch yourself," the security specialist murmured. "Grothar commanders aren't known for their patience or their appreciation of human initiative." Ellen nodded. "I know, but right now, he needs my skills more than I need his approval." "Just come back in one piece," Mira said. "If things go sideways here, I'd rather have another competent human around." Ellen managed a tight smile. "I'll do my best." She turned to join the commander's team, keenly aware that she was about to venture into the dangerous heart of a crippled starship with a group of Grothar who viewed her species as little more than an evolutionary footnote. But sometimes, she reflected, it took a crisis to rewrite the established order. And if there was one thing humans excelled at, it was thriving in crisis. The maintenance corridor was exactly as unpleasant as Ellen had anticipated. Narrow, dimly lit, and never intended for regular passenger use. It stretched before them like a claustrophobic tunnel through the ship's infrastructure. Exposed conduits and junction boxes lined the walls, while the deck plates vibrated ominously beneath their feet with each fluctuation in the ship's failing systems. Vrax led their small team, consisting of himself, Ellen, and 3 other Grothar warriors, with the confidence of someone accustomed to navigating hostile terrain. Ellen followed directly behind him, with the other Grothar bringing up the rear, a formation that placed her in the second most protected position. Whether this was a concession to her value as an engineer or simply coincidence, she couldn't tell. "The engineering section is approximately 2 kilometers from our current position," Vrax stated, his voice echoing slightly in the confined space. "At our current pace, we should reach it in approximately 20 minutes, assuming no obstructions." As if in direct response to his assessment, the ship lurched violently, sending them all staggering against the walls. Ellen felt the cold metal press against her shoulder as she fought to maintain her balance. The lights flickered, plunging them momentarily into darkness before stabilizing at a dimmer setting. "The auxiliary power is beginning to fluctuate," Ellen observed, pushing herself away from the wall. "We need to move faster." Vrax cast a measuring glance back at her. "Can your human physiology maintain a more rapid pace?" Ellen bit back a sharp retort. "I'll keep up, Commander. The question is whether the ship will remain intact long enough for us to reach engineering." One of the Grothar warriors behind them, a female with distinctive scarring along her jawline, spoke up. "Commander, my radiation monitor is showing increased levels. Nothing dangerous yet, but climbing steadily." Vrax nodded grimly. "As expected, the maintenance corridor has minimal shielding." He turned to Ellen. "Human, what is your assessment of the situation? You claimed expertise in electromagnetic propulsion." Ellen considered her words carefully, aware that technical jargon would likely only irritate the commander. "Based on what I saw from the view screen, we've encountered a plasma storm with unusual properties. The electromagnetic interference is what disabled our propulsion and navigation systems. If the pattern continues, we can expect progressive system failures throughout the ship." "Progressive failures," Vrax repeated. Meaning the problems will cascade. First navigation, then propulsion, then communications. Eventually, life support and artificial gravity will be affected. The good news is that the ship's power core is isolated with its own shielding. It should remain stable even if other systems fail. "And your solution?" Ellen chose her next words with deliberate precision. "I won't know for certain until I can assess the engineering systems directly, but I suspect we'll need to reconfigure the electromagnetic shielding to create a protective bubble around the propulsion matrix. It would be a temporary measure, just enough to give us maneuvering capability to exit the storm." Vrax considered this as they continued moving, the corridor gradually sloping downward as they approached the central section of the ship. "And you believe you can implement such a reconfiguration?" "With the right access to the ship's systems, yes. But it will require redirecting power from non-essential systems." Such as the forward section's luxury amenities, for starters," Ellen replied, unable to completely mask the edge in her voice. "Environmental controls in unoccupied areas, recreational facilities, the gourmet food synthesizers, anything drawing power that isn't keeping us alive or helping us move." A tight smile crossed Vrax's face. "Surprising, Ellen. You speak directly for a human. Most of your kind I've encountered are excessively deferential. Deference doesn't fix broken engines, Commander. And right now, broken engines are a more immediate threat than social protocol." Before Vrax could respond, they reached a junction where the corridor branched in 3 directions. A control panel on the wall displayed a schematic of their location, though the display was flickering erratically. "Which way?" one of the Grothar warriors asked. Ellen stepped forward to examine the schematic. "The central branch should lead us directly to the engineering section. But," she frowned, noting a warning indicator flashing on the display. "There's a pressure warning for that section of the corridor. The integrity may be compromised." Vrax studied the display. "Alternatives? We could take the port branch, but it would add at least 15 minutes to our journey. It loops around through the cargo section before connecting back to engineering. The ship shuddered again, more violently this time, and the lights dimmed further. A low, groaning sound reverberated through the metal around them, the distinctive sound of a starship structure under stress. "We don't have 15 minutes to spare," Vrax decided. "We'll proceed through the central branch. Stay alert for any signs of structural failure." As they moved into the central corridor, Ellen immediately noticed the change in atmosphere. The air felt thinner, and a persistent hissing sound suggested a minor pressure leak somewhere ahead. The deck plates beneath their feet vibrated more intensely, and occasional sparks shot from damaged conduits along the walls. They had progressed perhaps 100 meters when the corridor ahead suddenly plunged into darkness. "Power failure in this section," Ellen murmured, activating the small emergency light attached to her utility belt. The Grothar, with their superior night vision, seemed less affected by the darkness, but they activated their own lights as well, casting overlapping beams that illuminated the corridor ahead. What they saw caused them all to stop short. A section of the ceiling had partially collapsed, creating a jagged obstacle of twisted metal and exposed circuitry. Beyond it, the corridor appeared intact, but navigating the collapse would be challenging. "Can we clear it?" Vrax asked, assessing the obstacle. The female Grothar warrior moved forward to examine the damage more closely. "The structural elements are compromised. Commander, attempting to clear it might cause further collapse." Ellen joined her, studying the tangle of metal and circuitry. "We need to be careful with those exposed power conduits. They should be inactive with the power failure in this section, but if there's a surge from another section, they could reactivate." Vrax considered their options. "We'll proceed one at a time. I'll go first to test the stability." Without waiting for acknowledgement, the commander began carefully navigating the obstacle, his powerful frame allowing him to push aside smaller pieces of debris while ducking under the larger structural elements. He made it through with surprising grace for someone of his size, then turned back to assess the others. "Secure but precarious," he reported. "The human should go next. Her smaller size will make the passage easier." Ellen didn't wait for a second invitation. She approached the obstacle, studying the path Vrax had taken and adjusting for her smaller frame. The tight space actually worked to her advantage, allowing her to slip through gaps that the Grothar had to force their way through. She was halfway through when the ship lurched again. A sharp crack sounded from above, and Ellen looked up to see a support beam shifting precariously. Acting on instinct, she lunged forward, just as the beam crashed down where she had been standing moments before. The collapse sent a cloud of dust and debris into the air, momentarily obscuring her vision. When it cleared, Ellen found herself on the far side with Vrax, but the passage was now completely blocked. "Are you injured?" Vrax demanded, his tone more practical than concerned. Ellen quickly assessed herself. "No, I'm fine." She activated her communicator. "Can anyone hear me? Is everyone all right on your side?" The female warrior's voice came through, distorted, but understandable. "We are unharmed, but the passage is completely obstructed. There is no way through from our position." Vrax took the communicator. "Return to the junction and take the port branch. Proceed to engineering and await us there." "Understood, Commander," came the reply. Vrax turned to Ellen. "It seems we continue alone. Human." Ellen nodded, trying to ignore the implication that she was now solely responsible for keeping pace with the commander. "Engineering should be just ahead. Let's keep moving." They continued in silence for several minutes, the corridor gradually widening as they approached the central section of the ship. The emergency lighting here was still functioning, casting everything in a dim red glow that made the environment feel even more ominous. "You mentioned you were being transferred to Altair Engineering Station," Vrax said suddenly, breaking the silence. "That's a prestigious posting, especially for a human." Ellen glanced at him, surprised by the almost conversational tone. I was specifically requested. They're implementing a new propulsion system that's based partly on my research. Your research? Vrax's tone carried undisguised skepticism. Yes, Commander, my research. Ellen replied evenly. Humans may lack physical strength, but our minds work quite well. My thesis on adaptive electromagnetic shielding in variable plasma environments is actually highly relevant to our current situation. Vrax was silent for a moment, and Ellen wondered if she had overstepped. When he spoke again, his tone was measured. In the Grothar Military Academy, we are taught that every species has its place in the Alliance hierarchy, determined by their inherent capabilities. The strong lead, the weak follow. It is the natural order. And yet here we are, Ellen observed. A Grothar commander and a human engineer, equally dependent on each other's specialized capabilities to survive. Before Vrax could respond, they rounded a corner and found themselves facing a sealed bulkhead, the entrance to the engineering section. A control panel beside the door glowed with active status indicators. A promising sign. At least this section still has power, Ellen noted, moving to the panel to access the entry controls. She entered her engineering credentials, hoping her Level 7 authorization would be sufficient to override any lockdown protocols. The panel processed her input, then flashed red. Access denied, a computerized voice announced. Engineering section is under emergency lockdown. Command authorization required. Vrax stepped forward. Commander Vrax Grothar High Council Military Attaché. Authorization code Zenith 7 Delta 9. The panel processed his input, then flashed green. Command authorization accepted. Warning. Engineering section environmental conditions are compromised. Proceed with caution. The bulkhead hissed and began to slide open, revealing the cavernous engineering bay beyond. Ellen felt a momentary surge of relief, quickly replaced by apprehension as she took in the scene before them. The engineering section was in chaos. Warning lights flashed from multiple stations, and the central propulsion control hub was surrounded by a hastily erected containment field. Through the shimmering barrier, Ellen could see the chief engineer, a Tralaxian with 6 limbs moving in frantic coordination, working desperately at the controls. Several engineering crew members turned at their entrance, expressions of surprise quickly giving way to hope at the sight of a command officer. Commander! A junior engineer, a Vexilloran, hurried over to them. We thought we were cut off from the rest of the ship. Communications have been down for nearly an hour. Report, Vrax demanded, his commanding presence immediately establishing a sense of order in the chaotic environment. The plasma storm generated an electromagnetic pulse, unlike anything in our records. The engineer explained rapidly. It penetrated our shields and created a cascade failure in the navigation systems. The propulsion matrix shut down automatically to prevent catastrophic overload. But now we can't restart it, because the control algorithms are locked in a protection cycle. Ellen stepped forward. What about the auxiliary propulsion systems? The engineer looked at her with momentary confusion, clearly not expecting input from a human passenger, but answered nonetheless. Offline. The EMP affected both primary and auxiliary systems. We've been trying to implement a manual override, but the safety protocols are hard-coded. Ellen turned to Vrax. I need to speak with the chief engineer. Those containment fields suggest they're dealing with radiation exposure from the propulsion core. If I'm right, I might know a way to bypass the lockout. Vrax studied her for a moment, then nodded. Proceed, but be aware, human. If your intervention makes the situation worse, the consequences will fall on you. At this point, Commander, Ellen replied grimly, if we fail, the consequences will fall on everyone aboard this ship. She approached the containment field, activating her communicator to establish a connection with the chief engineer inside. Chief engineer? I'm Ellen Mora, Level 7 propulsion specialist. I believe I can help you bypass the safety lockout. The Tralaxian looked up, all four of his eyes blinking in surprise. A level 7? On a passenger manifest? His multiple arms continued working even as he spoke. The containment field prevents direct access to the propulsion controls. The radiation levels inside are tolerable for me, but would be lethal to most species. I don't need direct access, Ellen assured him. I need you to display the propulsion matrix status on the external monitors. I think we can create a feedback loop in the electromagnetic shielding to neutralize the effects of the plasma storm. The chief engineer hesitated. That's theoretically possible, but it would require rerouting power from multiple ship systems. The surge could overload critical infrastructure. If we don't get propulsion back online, we'll drift deeper into the storm until the radiation penetrates all our shielding, Ellen countered. It's worth the risk. After a moment's consideration, the Tralaxian nodded and input a series of commands. The large monitors surrounding the containment field flickered to life, displaying complex diagrams of the ship's propulsion and shielding systems. Ellen immediately began analyzing the data, her mind racing through potential solutions. The problem was exactly as she had suspected. The electromagnetic pulse from the plasma storm had created a resonance effect in the ship's propulsion matrix, triggering the automatic safety protocols. We need to reconfigure the auxiliary shields to create a counter-resonance, she announced, moving to a nearby control station. If we can generate an electromagnetic field with precisely the opposite phase to the one affecting our systems, they should neutralize each other. The chief engineer's multiple eyes widened in understanding. A destructive interference pattern, but the power requirements would be enormous. We'd need to divert energy from nearly all non-essential systems. Do it, Vrax commanded, surprising Ellen with his immediate support. Priority is restoring propulsion and navigational control. With the commander's authorization, the engineering crew sprang into action, rerouting power systems according to Ellen's specifications. As they worked, Ellen felt a growing sense of urgency. The ship continued to shudder periodically, each tremor more violent than the last, a clear indication that they were drifting deeper into the plasma storm. Power rerouting complete, one of the engineers announced. All non-essential systems are offline. We've got approximately 70% of total capacity available for the shield reconfiguration. It's not enough, the chief engineer said from within the containment field. The calculations indicate we need at least 85% to generate a stable counter-resonance. Ellen studied the power distribution diagram, searching for any remaining reserves they could tap. What about the emergency backup systems for the forward section? Since all passengers have been evacuated from there, can we divert that power as well? The chief engineer hesitated. Those systems are isolated specifically to ensure they remain available in a worst-case scenario. Diverting them would mean abandoning the forward section entirely. All eyes turned to Vrax, whose authorization would be required for such a drastic measure. The commander's expression remained impassive, but Ellen could sense the internal conflict. The forward section represented the privileged domain of the Grothar, the physical embodiment of their elevated status within the Alliance hierarchy. Abandoning it, even temporarily, carried symbolic weight beyond the practical considerations. After what seemed like an eternity, Vrax nodded curtly. Do it. Divert all power from the forward section. With that authorization, the engineering crew quickly implemented the additional power rerouting. The status indicators on the main display climbed steadily. 75%, 80%, 88%. We have sufficient power, the chief engineer confirmed. Initiating counter-resonance field. As the engineers worked to calibrate the newly configured shield, Ellen monitored the propulsion matrix diagnostics. If her theory was correct, the counter-resonance would neutralize the electromagnetic interference and allow them to restart the propulsion systems. The ship lurched violently, nearly throwing her from her position at the console. Warning lights flashed across multiple stations. "Radiation levels are spiking!" one of the engineers shouted. "The main shield is beginning to fail." Counter-resonance field at 60% and climbing, the chief engineer reported, his multiple limbs working frantically at the controls. We need another 2 minutes to reach full effectiveness. Vrax moved to Ellen's side, his powerful frame bracing against the shuddering deck. We don't have 2 minutes. Human. What alternatives do we have? Ellen's mind raced through possibilities, each more desperate than the last. We need to jumpstart the process. If we could create a power surge directly into the field generators, it might accelerate the counter-resonance. And how do we create such a surge? Ellen pointed to a control station on the far side of the engineering bay, outside the containment field. That station controls the emergency power couplings. If someone manually overrides the safety regulators and creates a direct connection between the power core and the shield generators, it would create the surge we need. But, Vrax prompted, clearly sensing the unspoken caveat. But it would expose whoever does it to a potentially lethal dose of radiation. The station isn't shielded because it's never meant to be used during a radiation event. Vrax straightened to his full height. I will do it. Growthar physiology can withstand radiation levels that would kill other species. Ellen shook her head. With respect, Commander. Even Growthar resilience has its limits. And more importantly, the procedure requires specific technical knowledge to implement correctly. One wrong setting and you could overload the entire system, leaving us worse off than before. Then what do you suggest? Vrax demanded, frustration evident in his tone. Ellen took a deep breath, knowing what she had to do. I'll do it. I have the technical expertise, and if I work quickly enough, the exposure might be survivable. Before Vrax could object, another violent tremor shook the ship, more powerful than any before. The lights flickered, and several control stations went dark momentarily before emergency power restored them. Hull breach detected in the forward section, an engineer called out. Automatic seals engaged, but structural integrity is failing. The chief engineer's voice came through the communication system, urgent and strained. We're out of time. The counter-resonance field is our only chance, but it's still building too slowly. Ellen met Vrax's gaze. Commander, I need your authorization to proceed with a manual override. For a moment, Vrax seemed torn between his ingrained sense of Growthar superiority and the pragmatic reality of their situation. Then, with a decisiveness that Ellen couldn't help but admire, he nodded. You have my authorization, Engineer Mora, but I will accompany you to the station. 2 sets of hands will work faster than one. There was no time to argue. Ellen quickly explained the procedure to Vrax as they made their way to the emergency power coupling station. The radiation warning indicators near the station were already flashing red, indicating levels well beyond safe exposure limits. The access panel needs to be overridden first, Ellen instructed, pointing to a sealed compartment beneath the main console. Then, we need to manually connect these 3 power couplings in sequence, precisely timed to create the surge pattern. Vrax knelt beside her, his powerful hands easily removing the access panel that would have required tools for Ellen to open. I will handle the physical connections. You manage the timing sequence. Ellen nodded, grateful for the division of labor that played to both their strengths. As they began the procedure, she felt the hairs on her arms standing on end, a physical manifestation of the radiation permeating the area. First coupling ready, Vrax reported, his voice steady despite the danger. Ellen monitored the power fluctuations on the console. Connect on my mark. Now! Vrax made the connection, and a surge of energy flowed through the system. The console lights flickered, then stabilized at a higher intensity. Second coupling, Ellen directed, fighting against the growing dizziness that signaled radiation exposure. 3, 2, 1, now. Again. Vrax executed the connection perfectly. The ship's lighting dimmed momentarily as power was diverted to the shield generators. Final coupling, Ellen said, her voice weaker now. This is the critical one. The timing has to be exact. She watched the power cycle indicators. waiting for the precise moment when the surge would align with the counter-resonance field's phase. Sweat beaded on her forehead, and her vision began to blur around the edges, symptoms of acute radiation poisoning. "Now!" she commanded, and Vrax made the final connection. A blinding flash erupted from the console as the power surge shot through the system. Ellen felt herself being thrown backward by the force of it. A strong arm, Vrax's, catching her before she could impact the bulkhead. For several seconds, the engineering bay was plunged into darkness. Then, gradually, the emergency lights flickered back to life, followed by the main systems. "Counter-resonance field at full power," the chief engineer's jubilant voice came over the communication system. "The electromagnetic interference is being neutralized. Propulsion matrix coming back online." A ragged cheer went up from the engineering crew. Ellen, still supported by Vrax's arm, felt a wave of relief wash over her, temporarily overshadowing the nausea and dizziness of radiation exposure. "We need to get you to medical," Vrax said, his tone gruff, but undeniably concerned. "You've absorbed a dangerous level of radiation." Ellen tried to stand on her own, but found her legs unwilling to support her weight. Without hesitation, Vrax lifted her effortlessly, carrying her toward the engineering bay exit. "The ship," Ellen protested weakly. "We need to ensure the propulsion systems remain stable." "The chief engineer can manage that," Vrax replied firmly. "You've done your part. Human, more than your part." As they moved through the corridors toward the medical bay, Ellen felt herself drifting in and out of consciousness. Through the haze, she registered the subtle shift in Vrax's demeanor, the grudging respect that had replaced his initial contempt, the careful way he carried her despite his imposing strength. The last thing she remembered before darkness claimed her was the sound of the ship's engines powering up, the vibration of renewed propulsion reverberating through the deck plates, the unmistakable feeling of a starship once again under control, pulling away from the deadly embrace of the plasma storm. And in that moment, despite the pain and the uncertainty, Ellen felt a profound sense of vindication, not just for herself, but for all humans who had ever been relegated to the back of the ship, their potential dismissed by those who measured worth solely in terms of physical prowess. Today, at least, the hierarchy had been rewritten. Ellen awoke to the sterile white ceiling of the medical bay, the soft hum of diagnostic equipment surrounding her. For a moment, she lay still, taking inventory of her body. The nausea and dizziness had subsided, replaced by a general weakness that suggested she had been unconscious for some time. The radiation countermeasures appeared to be working effectively. A clinical voice observed from somewhere to her right. "Your cellular regeneration is proceeding at an acceptable rate for a human." Ellen turned her head to see a Tralaxian medical officer monitoring a display of her vital signs. "How long was I out?" she asked, her voice raspy from disuse. "Approximately 17 hours, the doctor replied. "Commander Grokar had you brought directly to medical after the incident in engineering. He also authorized the use of our most advanced radiation treatments, typically reserved for Alliance officials." This information surprised Ellen almost as much as waking up alive. "The ship? Did we clear the plasma storm?" "Quite effectively. The counter-resonance field you designed dispersed the electromagnetic interference, long enough for the navigation systems to be restored. We're currently en route to Altair, though at reduced speed to minimize stress on the repaired propulsion systems." Ellen allowed herself a small smile of satisfaction. "And the other passengers? Any casualties?" "Minor injuries only. Remarkably, the forward section sustained significant damage, but since all personnel had been evacuated to the central and aft sections, there were no serious casualties." The doctor paused, then added with a note of professional admiration, "Your intervention likely saved everyone aboard this vessel." Before Ellen could respond, the medical bay doors slid open to admit Mira Tal, the security specialist she had met in the aft lounge. Mira's face broke into a relieved smile at seeing Ellen conscious. Look who's finally rejoined the land of the living, she said, approaching Ellen's bedside. How are you feeling, hero? Ellen grimaced at the title. Like I absorbed enough radiation to power a small city. But apparently I'll live. More than live, Mira corrected. You've become something of a celebrity on board. The human who saved the Zenith's pride is how they're telling it in the lounges. They? Everyone. Including, somewhat surprisingly, the Grothar. Mira leaned closer, lowering her voice conspiratorially. Your commander Vrax has been quite vocal about your contribution. It's causing quite the stir among the more traditional members of his species. Ellen found this difficult to believe. Vrax, the same Grothar commander who could barely stomach being in the same room as humans when we first met. Mira nodded, clearly enjoying Ellen's confusion. The very same. He's been visiting medical regularly to check on your progress. In fact, she glanced at the time display on the wall. He mentioned he would be stopping by around now. I should probably make myself scarce. Grothar commanders aren't known for enjoying an audience when they're attempting to express gratitude. Before Ellen could protest, Mira was already heading for the exit, offering a parting wink as the doors closed behind her. True to Mira's prediction, less than 5 minutes later, the medical bay doors opened again to admit Commander Vrax Grothar. He had exchanged his formal military attire for a more practical uniform, though he still carried himself with the unmistakable bearing of a Grothar commander. Ellen attempted to sit up straighter in her bed, a gesture of respect that seemed appropriate despite their unusual circumstances. Please, do not strain yourself, Vrax said, his deep voice surprisingly gentle. The medical officer informs me that your recovery is proceeding well, but unnecessary exertion should be avoided. Commander, Ellen acknowledged, settling back against her pillows. I understand I have you to thank for the premium medical care. Vrax made a dismissive gesture. It was the minimum acknowledgement for your service to this vessel and its passengers. He paused, seeming to choose his next words carefully. I have submitted a formal commendation to both the ship's log and the Alliance registry. Your actions in engineering were exemplary. Coming from a Grothar, particularly one of Vrax's rank, such praise was unprecedented. Ellen found herself momentarily at a loss for words. Vrax continued, filling the silence. I have also taken the liberty of upgrading your accommodations for the remainder of our journey to Altair. You will be transferred to a cabin in the central section once the medical officer clears you for release. That's very generous, Commander, but unnecessary. My aft cabin is perfectly adequate. A fleeting expression that might have been amusement crossed Vrax's face. Your original cabin no longer exists. Engineer Mora. The aft section underwent significant reconfiguration during the emergency power rerouting. Many of the passenger quarters were compromised. Oh, Ellen absorbed this information. Then I appreciate the accommodation. Vrax nodded, then seemed to struggle with what to say next. After a moment, he pulled a chair closer to Ellen's bedside and sat, a gesture that placed them at eye level. Another unprecedented breach of the usual hierarchical protocols. Engineer Mora, Ellen, he began, using her first name with careful deliberation. The events of the past day have prompted me to reconsider certain assumptions I have held regarding the inherent capabilities of different species within the Alliance. Ellen maintained a neutral expression, though inwardly she was astonished at the direction of the conversation. The Grothar have long prided ourselves on our physical resilience and strength, Vrax continued. These attributes have placed us at the forefront of Alliance leadership and security. But your actions demonstrated that other forms of strength, intelligence, technical expertise, and courage can be equally vital to survival. Every species has its strengths. Commander, Ellen offered. The Alliance works best when we recognize and utilize all of them. Vrax inclined his head in acknowledgement. A perspective I have been too slow to appreciate. When this journey began, I viewed the seating arrangement on this vessel, Grothar in the forward cabins, humans in the aft, as the natural order. Now I find myself questioning the wisdom of segregating our most capable engineers so far from the ship's critical systems. Ellen couldn't help but smile at the irony. Perhaps there's something to be said for mixing things up a bit. Different perspectives often lead to more robust solutions. Indeed. Vrax shifted slightly, his massive frame looking somewhat incongruous in the standard medical bay chair. I have taken the liberty of contacting the director of Altair Engineering Station regarding your arrival. Your research on adaptive electromagnetic shielding will be given priority status and additional resources. Ellen blinked in surprise. Thank you, Commander. That's extremely helpful. It is pragmatic, Vrax corrected, though without his former dismissive tone. Your theories prove their worth in the most demanding circumstances possible. The Alliance would be foolish not to develop them further. A chime from Vrax's communication device interrupted their conversation. He checked it briefly, then rose to his feet. I must attend to my delegation. We will be arriving at Altair in approximately 12 hours. The medical officer believes you will be cleared for release well before then. I look forward to it, Ellen said. And thank you again, Commander, for the medical treatment, the accommodation upgrade, and the support for my research. Vrax paused at the door, looking back at her with an expression that Ellen couldn't quite decipher. It is I who should thank you. Ellen Mora. You have given me much to consider about the true meaning of strength and the proper ordering of our alliance. With that surprisingly reflective statement, he departed, leaving Ellen to contemplate the remarkable transformation in their relationship, from hierarchical contempt to something approaching mutual respect, all forged in the crucible of crisis. 3 days later, as the Zenith's Pride prepared for its departure from Altair Station, Ellen stood in the docking bay alongside Mira Tal, watching the passengers board for the vessel's return journey. So you're staying on Altair for the foreseeable future? Mira asked, leaning against a cargo container. Ellen nodded, feeling a mixture of excitement and trepidation about her new posting. The engineering director was practically giddy about implementing my shielding theories. Apparently, having the endorsement of a Grothar High Council commander opens a lot of doors. Mira grinned. I bet it does. Speaking of our favorite commander. She nodded toward the boarding area, where Vrax Grokar and his delegation were preparing to board the repaired vessel. The damage to the forward section had been temporarily patched at Altair, with more comprehensive repairs scheduled at the vessel's home port. To Ellen's surprise, Vrax spotted them and changed direction, approaching with purposeful strides. Both women straightened automatically in response to his commanding presence. Engineer Mora, Specialist Tal. He greeted them formally. I trust Altair Station is meeting your expectations. Very much so, Commander, Ellen replied. The research facilities are exceptional. Vrax nodded, seemingly pleased. I received notification this morning that the High Council has approved my recommendation for a review of passenger vessel design protocols. Specifically, the practice of segregating passengers by species is to be reconsidered in favor of distributing specialized personnel throughout the vessel for more efficient emergency response. Ellen couldn't hide her astonishment. That's a significant change, Commander. One long overdue, Vrax acknowledged. The incident aboard this vessel demonstrated the flaws in our current approach. A ship is only as strong as its most vulnerable section. By relegating certain species to specific areas, we create unnecessary weaknesses in the overall system. Mira raised an eyebrow. So the Grothar won't be exclusively occupying the forward cabins anymore? A hint of a smile touched Vrax's stern features. Not exclusively. No. In fact, I have made a personal decision regarding my return journey. He extended a datapad, displaying his boarding information. I have requested accommodation in the aft section. Ellen stared at the display in disbelief. You're voluntarily sitting in the back of the ship? I am, Vrax confirmed. It seems appropriate, given recent events, to experience the perspective of those who have traditionally been assigned to that section. Besides, he added, with what Ellen could have sworn was a glint of humor in his eyes, I have learned that when crisis strikes, the back of the ship may well be the safest place to be, particularly when it is occupied by humans of exceptional capability. The final boarding call echoed through the docking bay, interrupting their conversation. I must take my leave, Vrax said, inclining his head in a gesture of respect that would have been unthinkable when they first met. Engineer Mora, I anticipate hearing of the success of your research. The Alliance will be stronger for it. Safe travels, Commander, Ellen replied, and thank you for everything. As they watched Vrax rejoin his delegation and board the Zenith's Pride, Mira shook her head in amazement. A Grothar commander choosing to sit in the aft section? I never thought I'd see the day. Ellen smiled, thinking of the extraordinary chain of events that had led to this moment. Sometimes, it takes a crisis to reveal the truth about strength and weakness. The Grothar have always been physically powerful, but perhaps now, they're beginning to understand that true strength comes in many forms. And that the people in the back of the ship might just save everyone's lives one day? Mira suggested. Exactly, Ellen agreed, watching as the boarding ramp retracted and the ship's massive doors began to close. Sometimes the most valuable perspectives come from unexpected places, even from the back of the ship. As the Zenith's Pride departed Altair Station, Ellen couldn't help but feel that something fundamental had shifted in the Zarkon Alliance. It might be a small change, one commander choosing a different cabin, one ship reviewing its passenger arrangement policies, but small changes often preceded larger ones. And perhaps someday, in a future not too distant, the notion of relegating any species to the back would seem as antiquated and misguided as it truly was.